Hello everyone, good evening. I hope you can hear me. I sincerely hope you can. If someone can let me know in the chat just to double check that you can hear me before I start going into my rambling introduction. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm sure that you are all very excited about your doctorate interviews, and well done to those of you that have got interviews this year. That is an amazing achievement within itself. My name is Holly. I am currently an NHS assistant psychologist. I have applied to the doctorate 6 times. I really am hoping it's not going to be a 7th. And I have interviewed twice. Thank you very much. Yeah, lovely. We can hear you good. And I've interviewed twice the last 2 years. So all the information I want to give you is a collection of stuff that I've been told as top tips and some stuff that I found helpful. I am not a trainee as of yet, but hopefully this will help you in the way that it's helped me. You're watching Clinical Psychology Community UK, and this is our webinar for March, doctorate interview stuff. And today we are going to I'm going to cover a couple of disclaimers about doctorate courses and interviews before we get going on any advice. I'm going to talk to you about how to prepare best for your interviews, what to do during the interview, and how to manage after the interview, which is a very important point. And then I'm going to talk to you about some of the additional tasks that courses will often use on the interview days, as well as doing a Q&A section. So if you do have any questions or anything, pop it in the chat and I will hopefully be able to answer those. We will have a whole section dedicated to questions and answers, and I've already had loads of amazing questions sent in from anyone who follows us on Instagram. So thank you so much to everyone there. Firstly, I want to preface this with some disclaimers. Each course has different things that they value in candidates. All right. So some courses might really like you to have leadership experience. Some might really like media experience. Some might like drama experience. Each course values very different things. So that's why when we're thinking about applying, you need to really match your values with the course ethos and their values. That's why it's very important. So each course does things differently. So I'm going to give you some generic advice for preparation and things like that. Being yourself and giving your authentic opinion will be valued by all courses, though. None of the courses are going to want you to go in and pretend like you know the answers when you don't. They want to know what you think. They want to know what you're bringing. That's what they want to know. So be honest, be open, be authentic. That's one of the biggest pieces of advice. The other thing is, this is, as I sort of said at the beginning, this is not a definitive list of tips, just what's been helpful for me and for others. I'm seeing a couple of comments in the chat saying you can't hear me. I'm hoping if people can hear me, if you can just pop in there, because I've already had someone tell me they can hear me. I just want to make sure before we're going on. For anyone who is struggling, this will be available as a recording afterwards as well. As I said, I'm not a trainee. I'm just someone who's done quite a few interviews. All right. And hopefully this advice will also be helpful for you if you're on the reserve list. And lots of the tips do relate to online interviews. Okay. Because we are in March 2021. We are in a time when online interviews are happening. So a lot of this advice is. Oh, fantastic. Lots of people can hear me. Okay, great. If you can't hear me, just double check that your sound is turned on your computer. I'm really glad that you guys can hear me. That's great. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, so those are my disclaimers out of the way. Basically, you need to do what's right for you in your interview prep. I can give you these tips. I can tell you what's helped me. But at the end of the day, you know how to do interviews for yourself. You know the best way that you work. So I would do what you do best. Don't come at me if this doesn't work for you, basically, is what I'm saying. First off, I just want to say a huge congratulations. I mean, it is absolutely huge to get an interview. It really is. Regardless of the outcome, it's massive. So really well done. Take some time to feel good about it. Don't think, oh my God, I've got to prep straight away, because before you know it, you will have lost that moment where you can feel really good about getting an interview. I have a rule that if I do get offered an interview, that whole day I won't do any prep. I will just enjoy the fact that I got an interview, and it's really great. That's what I do for myself. And then the next day or a couple of days after, then I'll start thinking about how I can prepare. And also reward yourself before doing any prep, because you really want to savor that moment. It's really important. You know, it's a massive, massive achievement. Congratulate yourself, reward yourself, because you've done it. The other thing to say is you have roughly a 1 in 3 chance of getting a place if you get an interview, which is huge. I think that's massive. Considering when you apply, it's like a 1 in 10, 1 in 20 sort of ballpark chance. And it really does depend on the course, but most courses interview 3 times as many people as they have places. So that's something else that you can congratulate yourself on. We're going to move on to preparation. Okay, so what do I do to start preparing? I've got some basics for you. Firstly, try and get enough sleep the night before. I know it's really difficult, but try and keep your normal routine, all the standard stuff. Make sure you eat breakfast on the day. Make sure you drink water. And remember that too much coffee and caffeine equals nervous energy. Therefore, maybe not the best thing to bring into an interview. Make sure that you have looked after yourself as best you can. The other thing that I put down here as one of the basics is anxiety management. For me, that looks like a lot of breathing exercises and breathing really deeply, because it just calms that anxiety response down for me. Some people it might be mindfulness, grounding techniques. It really could be anything. But whatever works for you, however you manage your anxiety. I appreciate that's unhelpful, but we're all mental health professionals here, and we all probably advise on anxiety management stuff to other people every single day. So applying some of that to ourselves can be helpful. Moving on, my first top tip is a lesson that I learned the hard way. Do not over prepare. Do not over prepare. I can't tell you how important that is. So here's a little anecdote. My first interview was 2 years ago for Bath, and it was the first interview I ever had. And I basically bought a notebook and I wrote pages and pages of notes about psychology, about stuff that interested me, about research papers, about so much stuff. So much so that I filled that notebook and had to buy another notebook, which I proceeded to fill up. Don't do that. Unless it works for you, which I highly doubt it does, because no brain can remember all of that information. You just can't. So what I would encourage you to do instead is be focused with your reading. Yes, you might want to do some reading if it's helpful to you, if you feel that that's what you need to do. And the things that you might want to look at could be the NHS Constitution and the values, could be the course that you're interviewing for, could be particular statistics tests, t-tests or ANOVAs or research methods. It could be anything. What I'm looking at is research method stuff, and I'm also looking a little bit at some research papers and things. Just be really focused with your reading. A way that you can do that is to look at the trainee job description and person spec. All right, is there anything on there that really scares you? Is there anything on there that you think would throw you on the day? If there is, then maybe think of a way that you can manage that. That doesn't necessarily mean go and read loads of stuff, but it could be, okay, how am I going to manage when that question comes up? For me, when the research stuff comes up, I immediately get anxious. So the way that I manage that is I breathe and I'm going to speak to it. I'm going to tell them that I'm anxious and that research makes me nervous. I'm going to be honest, because I think that's a far more authentic way rather than trying to pretend that you know what you're talking about. Don't try to memorize answers is another part of this. If you do, then even if you do remember your answer in the interview, you might not be answering the question that they ask. And it can trip you up. So try not to do that. Practicing is different. Just try not to memorize anything, because generally it doesn't really help. And also, for online interviews particularly, try to avoid having thousands of post-it notes around your laptop. The beauty of online interviews is that now we can have stuff off camera that they can't see. There's loads of paper everywhere, but actually that can be quite overwhelming. So I would encourage you not to do that. Maybe just to have a few things. Again, for me, when the research questions come up, I'm going to have a few pointers, because I know that there's something there that I can kind of rely on if I get really anxious and forget what I'm talking about. But again, be focused with that and think really about what you actually need in that situation. Because remember, you have got this interview based on your application. So they already really like everything that you've experienced, the knowledge that you've brought, and the reflection that you've done. So now you just need to build on that. They already know what you can and can't do. So it's okay to say if you can't do something. The other thing is to read one recent research paper that you can talk about. Because sometimes they might ask you to critique it or something like that. I mean, in my experience of my interviews, I've never had that. I've never been asked to critique a recent paper or talk about how a recent paper's impacted my practice or anything. I've never been asked that, but I know people that have. So it's a good idea to have a recent research article that you can talk about. The second thing that I want to talk about in terms of preparation is prepare 2 or 3 case studies or vignettes, whatever you want to call them. This actually came from someone that was my mentor. It's sort of a mentor. It's a current trainee who agreed to sort of give me a bit of advice on stuff through DClinPsy Connect, which I'll link the details down below in the description. Essentially, what they said is, prepare 2 or 3 case studies, have a clinical case study, have a good example and a bad example. So an example that you felt really proud of, an example that could have improved and actually you've learned lots of lessons from. So have one of those each, and really spend some time selecting that and thinking about what you want to show, because there will always be something. Give me an example of a time when X, Y, and Z. There will probably be something like that. So having an idea of the case study that you want to talk about is helpful, and also an example of some research you were involved in. Having a way of, just having some bullet points of things that you can talk about, a rough idea of what you might say if you were asked about some research. This could be audits and evaluations. It could be research studies. It could be master's projects, undergrad projects. Could be anything. And one of the questions I had on Instagram was, what if I'm not an assistant and I don't have any case studies? Okay, well, I'd be surprised if you didn't have any clinical contact and you got an interview for the doctorate. So even if you're not an AP, that's fine. You've got clinical contact. So try and think of one of those cases that you've worked with, one of those people that you've worked with, and think of an example that you're proud of, an example that you learned lots of lessons from. That's my advice there. And again, this isn't about memorizing. This isn't about thinking, oh, I've missed that section out and now it's not about that. It's about having a good idea about how you might discuss that. Practice telling your partner or your family about it. That's my plan anyway. And I think that's helpful just to practice how you might talk about it. Moving on. I feel all posh because I've used an accent. Prepare some useful aide-mémoires. And what I mean by that is the stuff that you have around your laptop. Some things that might be able to help you. As I said, not too many, but what might help you, so like I said, for the research question, always heightens my anxiety. So I know what structure I'm going to use to answer those sorts of questions, just so it just calms my anxiety to have it there. You could have something on the NHS values. You could have something on psychotherapeutic models if you wanted to, if there's any that you have worked with. But basically, whatever's helpful for you. Don't have too many, as I've said. You don't need to go overboard on psychotherapeutic models either. Like, the stuff that you've worked with is fine. And if you don't know, then you don't know. And that's okay. The other thing on preparation, what is your perspective? That's what they want to know. They want to know what you think about something and what you can bring to training, your sort of style of thinking. How are you going to fit with the other people on training? That's what they want to know. You are offered an interview based on your application, your experience, your knowledge, your reflections. You're good enough. You've got your interview. That's amazing. And even people that didn't get interviews this year are still good enough. That's the cruelty of this process, unfortunately. But if you have an interview, you're good enough. You're fine. So just remember that. But what I would encourage you to do is spend some time thinking about where you stand on some issues. What your opinion is on some things. Diversity, inclusion, social justice, power, the social graces, privilege, where you sit and what your opinions are on those things. That can be really helpful. But again, if you don't know, when they ask you an interview. If they ask you an interview, then you don't know, and that's fine. What are your values? Think about what's important to you. Why do you want to be a clinical psychologist? Why do you want to do training? Really think about what it is that you want to get out of clinical psychology and why it's important to you. Because when you think about what actually is important to you, not just mimicking the NHS values, but actually what's important to you, you come across as so much more authentic, so much more believable, and so much more likable. And you're way more likely to get a place, in my experience, because I've pretended like I know what I was talking about the last couple of years. This is the first year where I actually feel like I do kind of know a bit about what I'm talking about, which is nice. Here's another thing is, what do you think clinical psychology will look like in the future? What do you want clinical psychology to look like for your future? How do you want it to be a part of your life? Really think about that. And of course, it wouldn't be 2021 without mentioning COVID. So how has COVID been for you? What's been really difficult for you? Do you feel ready to do training? How do you think training might be affected because of COVID? What do you expect? Really have a think about some of these issues. I would be surprised if COVID wasn't mentioned in some of the interviews. I'd be really surprised. But you never know. The bottom line is, think about what your perspective is on things. That's what they want to know. They don't want to know what was in your CBT textbook from third year. That's not what they want to know. They already know that. What they want to know is what you think, what you can bring, what your experiences are, and what you've learned. So really remember that. The other thing I want to talk about is a very nerve-wracking thing, and it's mock interviews. I've actually booked my mock interview for next week with both of my supervisors, face-to-face, and I'm absolutely terrified. I think I'm more nervous about the mock than I am about the real one. It's really scary because it's people you know. I get it. But for me, this is the first year where I've had two supervisors that are clinical psychologists. I am not passing up that opportunity to do a mock interview and to get their opinion on what I can do differently, how I can do things, what my strengths are. Absolutely. So do a mock interview, find someone, preferably a clinical psychologist, but your friends and family can also help to make sure that you come across as authentic, because they know you really well. It could be my partner's offered to do some, which is super helpful, and for the same reason, he knows me really well. He knows when I'm being authentic. So that's very important. When you're doing your mock, try and replicate the conditions of the interview as much as possible. So it could be, mimicking doing it online. It could be the number of people that are there, the types of questions they might ask, the length of the interview, that sort of thing. And the other thing that this is a reflection that I've had on my two, I've interviewed at Bath in 2019 and Cardiff in 2020. And Bath was a very formal interview. Not a bad thing. It's just very formal and you have, X amount of time, and it's very, very formal. Whereas Cardiff was a bit more conversational and a bit more relaxed. So different courses do things differently. And perhaps speaking to the trainees that you might be able to speak to on the day, some courses allow that. You might be able to find out, how they are to kind of prepare yourself for that. Film yourself answering questions. Now, this is super, even for me, who does this once a month, it's still awkward filming myself and watching it back. I still find it very, very, very difficult. But it is also helpful because you're essentially just practicing listening to your own voice, which I find in an interview is quite stressful, actually, because you think, oh, am I rambling? Oh, no, I can't remember where I am. Practicing it helps. So you can film yourself answering questions. Do it that way. As I said, you can use friends, family, peers, colleagues, supervisors, trainees, online reflective practice groups. You can use whatever works for you to help practice during the interview and before the interview. So I hope that helps in terms of preparation. Those are the things that I have found have really helped me in preparation for interviews, not just for the doctorate, but for assistant jobs and things like that. Now I want to move on to during the interview. So here are some other basics. What to expect. So for anyone who hasn't interviewed before, it's actually, to be honest, very similar to any job interview I've ever done. You will have a panel, usually of a course staff member, so like a clinical tutor, You will have probably a regional supervisor, so a clinical psychologist from the area. And the third one might well be, it could be another clinical psychologist from the area or staff member, but in lots of cases, they're using experts by experience. So they're using sort of service users or carers that have been through the experience and are helping to inform selection on training. So those are the sort of panel members. If it's online, then you will be using Teams or Zoom or something like that probably. And you'll be able to see everyone, and you'll also be able to see yourself. The interviews usually, if there's one, it might be 45 minutes. Some unis split it, so they might have an academic interview, they might have a clinical interview. They will explain all of that on your interview invite or the stuff that they send you afterwards. So it'll all be on there, so you kind of know what to expect. So spend some time thinking about that and thinking, okay, well, I've got one interview and it's a half an hour, and then I've got a half an hour break, and then I've got another half an hour, and then I've got a task, just so you can kind of visualize going through that day, so you kind of know what to expect. Smile. It's okay to smile. It's much more endearing when now I'm speaking to you with a smile than if I were to speak to you like this. Which person would you hire? This person. So smile. It's okay to do that. And, be human. Just show your emotion is, I suppose, what I mean. Not necessarily smiling and happiness, but show your emotion is important, I think. Think about your first impression. Now, this was a point that I got from the worry people, and I will link the video in the description. She basically said that on her first go of interviews, she attended and was sort of, when they asked, how are you? Because that's how they'll always start an interview. She was like, oh yeah, I'm really nervous. And I'm fine. I'm good. I'm really nervous though. And then the second year when she went, yeah, I'm really excited. Thanks. Really looking forward to this. Which person are you going to give a place to is the point that she makes. So really think about your first impression. Think about what you're wearing, making sure that it's appropriate, that sort of thing. Dress appropriately. Don't wear pajamas on the bottom half. Last year, I wore heels, I wore like a nice work dress. I was feeling myself, basically. And that's really important. Wear something that you feel comfortable in. And the rule is go smarter. It's better to go smarter than it is to go too casual. So yeah, for most interviews, you'd wear like a jacket or like something nice. Make sure that you dress appropriately, basically. And online interviews, yeah, you need a quiet space. You need good sound quality, internet. Make sure you're looking at the camera. This is a tip from David Murphy, who was the previous BPS president. I, again, will link his video down below. And he basically did a video about preparing for online interviews. And it was really, really helpful. So looking at the camera, rather than looking at the screen, is much more engaging. If I spent the entire webinar looking down at the screen, I don't think it would be quite as engaging as if I were to look at you like that. So make sure you look at the camera, as weird as that might sound. I know it might feel weird as well because you're just looking at this tiny little camera on your screen. I know, but look at the camera that's actually capturing you. And the other thing is cover the picture of yourself on the screen with paper if it's distracting. Don't cover your entire body in paper. That's a different situation. I don't think they take kindly to that. But if you see your little picture on the screen, you can either get rid of it or cover it with a post-it note, because I personally find that massively distracting. And when I'm doing these webinars, I do not have a picture of myself on the screen because it's far too distracting. I hope that helps. Those are just some basics about what to do during the interview. Now I want to kind of get into some more specifics. The first one is breathe. Take a beat to think. Take a deep breath as they're asking the question. As I said, deep breaths really calm my anxiety and help me think clearly. So when they're asking the question, I tend to take a nice deep breath, and it helps. It helps center me and helps me really focus on that question. What I would do is have a notepad or something there that you can just jot down the main points of the question. Because what happens for me when I get really anxious is I might be talking my way through an answer and then my brain just suddenly stops. It goes off a cliff. It doesn't remember what the hell I was going to say next. So having the main points of the question down, I can always kind of recall back to that and say, okay, now I can get back on track. But it's also okay to ask, oh, sorry, can you repeat the question? That's completely fine. Yeah, have somewhere you can write down your initial thoughts and ideas. Again, the main points of the question, and then what I tend to do is think about what my initial thoughts are, write maybe one word to summarize each sort of thought, and that kind of helps you structure your answer. And it also helps you manage your anxiety and remain calm. That's one of the main things, because for me, if I have something written down, even if my mind goes off that cliff again, I know that it's there and I can always recall, I can refer back to it. The next thing I want to talk about in terms of during the interview is, again, this is something from the Worry People's video, Miranda's video, but it's also something I have been, some feedback that I've had from my previous interviews. Show you're working. Just like in a maths exam, you get marks for showing you're working, not just the answer. So reflection should be a part of your answer in most cases. There might be some questions that aren't. If they ask you to design a research study or something, there's probably not much room for reflection there. But reflection should be part of your answer in most cases, or in some way. So show that. Think, okay, well, actually, if they ask you a question, you can think, well, my initial thoughts are X, Y, and Z, and I'm really being pulled towards X, and I think that might be because of my bias towards this. But I think chiefly the points are blum, blum, blum. You can do it that way. So bring in some reflection somewhere. And that's why reflecting before the interview on your own experiences is helpful, because you've kind of already done that. You just need to then explain what your reflections have been, what you've learned. What I would do is briefly summarize your reflections at the start, like I said. Alternative perspectives, what jumps out at you, what seems important. If it's a scenario question, then you could, think, wow, these are the thoughts that are going on in my head. This is what feels important. And then go on to answer the question. And then maybe you could reflect afterwards and say, actually, after answering the question, X, Y, and Z are now the most important things. Basically show some reflection. They want to see how you approach things. They know what experience you have. That's how you got through the door. What they want to see now is how you might handle things on training, how you might handle risk, how you might handle difficult situations, how robust are you in terms of your reflective skills, because that is something you will need on training. Be honest. If you aren't sure, say you're not sure. I can't implore you enough to do this, because this is just something I did not do. I just was like, I'm so nervous to say that I don't know what the answer is. That it's such an easy excuse for them to say, oh, she doesn't know, I'm going to reject her. I think that's what was going through my head. But now I feel much more confident in the experiences that I've got and the knowledge that I've got. And, you're never going to know it all. My supervisors don't know it all. The consultants I work with don't know it all. People don't know it all. You can't. So it's okay. What you can say is, oh, do you know, I don't know. But if I was on training or I was on placement, I would do A, B, and C. You can say that. That's a kind of good workaround. And you're being honest and you're being authentic. The next thing in this, during the interview, and this was some advice that I received from a clinical psychologist who shortlists on one of the London courses. She said, structure your answer. And it seems really basic, like, yes, obviously I should. But in my first interviews, not what I did. I basically went, that was it. And it was not helpful. So there are a couple of ways that you can structure your answer. I would have a notepad there to make some notes to structure your answer. Like I said, your initial thoughts, couple of words, what your 3 main points are, and then some reflections afterwards and some summary. That's the way that you can do it. Like I said, include some reflection. Think of 3 to 5 main points that you can talk about. If they're asking you a big question about psychology, there's going to be more than 3 points that are important. But what you can say is, these are the 3 most important things that are coming to my mind at the moment. Talk about them each, summarize them at the end. You can use a model for structure. So in previous interviews, I've used the STAR model, which is situation, task, action, response, reflection. That's a model that I've used. But I actually find that the what, so what, now what model is more helpful for me. And it just makes more sense to me when I'm speaking about things, because I think that's how I think anyway. So find a model that works for you. We've done loads of videos on models on the YouTube channel, so have a little look. There's loads and loads on there. And then summarize your points at the end. Because if you are answering with a structure, it immediately makes you sound like you know more about what you're talking about. Makes you sound more in control. And I think it's more impressive than just sort of waffling and maybe finding your point. Definitely having some structure. And just so you know, when you are writing notes down, when they've asked you the question and you're writing notes, those 10 seconds might feel like 2 long minutes of silence, but it is worth it in my opinion. But if you are one of those people that can hold 15 different things in mind and speak and make it coherent, absolutely do that. I'm not shaming you. I think I'm very jealous. But make sure you structure your answer however you can, whatever works for you. The second to last thing about during the interview, take each question as it comes. So what I've found in my practice is that there are some questions I really like, and there are some questions I absolutely hate, and I don't do well at, and it makes me anxious. But what you need to do, if you think a question went badly, try and let it go and face the next one positively. Because there could be, 10 questions, 15 questions. If you think you've answered 1 or 2 badly, that's not the end of the world. You still have the power to change how you're going to answer the rest of the questions. You can still give those good answers. And also they're not looking for someone that's 100% perfect. I think that's the thing. Being able to speak to, actually, I'm not sure I've answered the question there. That's endearing and it's authentic as well. But basically, try and face the next one as positively as you can. Try and wipe the slate clean as best you can. I know that it's easier said than done. I do appreciate that. One thing that can help, though, and I don't even know if you'll have time to do this, but one thing that can help is imagery. So you can imagine that question on a piece of paper and it's being folded up into a paper aeroplane and being thrown away or being burned up or something like that. You can imagine the question is just not important anymore. It's in your past. You're not worried about it. The other thing you could do is physically shake it off. Like below the camera right now, I'm shaking my hands and I'm sure my arms look like they're vibrating, but you could shake it off however, or just maybe do one of those or something. I don't know. But basically, whatever you need to do to be able to answer each question as if it was the first question of the interview, try and do that as much as you can. Remember that each question is another opportunity to show them how great you are. It's another opportunity to show them all of your experience and all of the amazing things that you can do. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of during the interview is think about questions to ask. You might not always be given the opportunity to ask questions. I actually never have in any of the doctorate interviews that I've done, but it's helpful just in case. And try to think of something interesting, not just when do we expect to hear, because most of the courses tell you that anyway. But think of something interesting. Something that you've read about the course or about the city that you might be working in, or I don't know, something. Think about something that's interesting that you genuinely want to know. If you can't think of anything, that's also fine, because it's likely that the course has given you loads of really great information. Think about what you actually want to know. Yeah, exactly. So that is during the interview. I want to talk about after the interview, and I don't want to gloss over this because I do think it's really important. I think it's important to have a plan in place, regardless of the outcome. Well done. You have just done a doctorate interview. Reward yourself, regardless of how it went. My first interview, I walked out of the room because it was face-to-face. I walked out of the room and I immediately went to the loo and cried because I knew that I just hadn't used that opportunity as best I could. And I didn't reward myself. And I think it was even harder to prepare for the interview the next year because I hadn't really rewarded myself for how difficult that was. So make a plan to do something you enjoy. Have a takeaway. Have some time with your friends and family if you can, or digitally if that's what we're doing at the moment. Just do something that you enjoy. It's so important. And try and relax. I know it's difficult. Some people might have to wait a week or 2 weeks even to find out whether they've got a place or not after their interview, so I get it. But try your very best to relax and distract yourself. And plan for all of the outcomes. Successful, reserve, unsuccessful. What are you going to do if you get offered a place? How are you going to manage that? Because that sounds very exciting. How are you going to manage if you're a reserve? because that's an extension of the anxiety, really, to wait and see if you might have a place. And if you're unsuccessful, that's a whole other set of emotions. So try and think about how you might manage in all of the outcomes after the interview. That can kind of help, I think. The other thing is to keep a record. Now, this is un poco controversial. Write your answers down, and it will help you in future interviews. Now, I just really want to clarify, this is not so you can share the questions, because we're asked not to do that, because it puts people at an unfair advantage if they have access to the questions. So write your answers down just to help you reflect on things potentially for your next interview. If you were unsuccessful after this interview, it will help you. That's what I've done for all of my interviews. It's just helped me really think about what I said and anything that I can improve on. Reflect on your answers. A couple of days later, take a couple of days. Don't do it straight away, because you'll just be ruminating over and over and over and over and over and over again about the questions, and that's not helpful. Think about what went wrong and what went well. Use a reflective model. Keep a note of the feedback you receive, if any. You know, if you're unsuccessful, you will get a chance to get some, hopefully, quite detailed feedback. Fortunately, both years, I've received really good feedback. This really helped me develop. So definitely keep a note of any feedback that you receive. Now, I'm going to move on very quickly to additional tasks. So different courses do things differently, all right? So some courses might ask you to critique a journal article. Some might ask you to watch a video of a clinical session and answer questions, or do a formulation, or do whatever. It will be outlined roughly in your interview invitation, all right? Clinical video tasks. This, like I said, could be clinical letter writing, could be a formulation, could be a risk assessment. But essentially what this is doing is finding out what your existing skill level is. And it's very difficult to prepare for, actually. You know, if you haven't done formulations before, yeah, you can absolutely do some reading about formulations. And if it happens to be a formulation, then all you can do is do your best and use your knowledge of the theory that you've got. You know, if you know something about CBT, CFT, DBT, if you know anything about any of those, you can employ that in there. They're very difficult to prep for. We've all written clinical letters, probably. We've all done risk assessments in some way. So all you can do is rely on your skill. Academic ones, there might be like a research test, or critiquing literature. It could be interpret this data, write a conclusion to this paper, or so. It could be anything. Again, it's based on your skill, so it's very difficult to revise for. It's kind of a case of like, almost like you have the skill or you don't. Some places do group tasks, so it could be like some sort of role play. It could be anything. It could be a question and answer session. It could be anything. I think group tasks are a little bit less likely this year, and hopefully the courses will be able to give you some more information on that. But basically, remember to rely on your experience. You are experienced enough to get an interview. You are knowledgeable enough and skillful enough to get an interview. So rely on your experience. You know what you're doing. Just try and breathe and manage that anxiety. Now it's time for the Q&A. And what I'm going to do, I've seen some questions come in, but I'm going to start going through the questions that I had from Instagram. And hopefully I've tried to pick ones that are really broad and will hopefully help people. There were loads of questions about how to secure an interview, which I have covered in a doctorate application video, and I will do another one this September as well. I've not answered what questions are going to come up and example questions, because we're asked not to share the questions. So, I mean, I can give you ideas of what they might be and things that they might prepare you for, but I'm not going to give you any previous questions. So the first one is how to answer, what is a piece of literature you've recently read? Well, I've actually never been asked this, as I said. They'll usually ask you to critique it or describe how it's impacted your practice. So what I'd encourage you to do is find an article or a book or a model that's interested you, read it and reflect on it. Think about what that literature means for you. Is it relevant to your work? Does it elicit any emotions in you? Is it difficult to read? What does it do for you? And how does it impact your practice? Does it link to your practice at all? Is there anything there? So basically reflect on some literature and have some points ready. As an international applicant, do I need to know the workings of the NHS? Yes, because you might not be funded by the NHS. You might be, but you might not be. And funding I'll come to in a minute, but you will be placed in the NHS for work. So you will need to have some idea of how the NHS works, because it's super competitive anyway, even for international applicants. So the ones that know something about the NHS are at an advantage. So yes, you do need to know about the NHS. Have a look at the NHS Constitution and values, easily found online. Now, in terms of funding, I did get asked a funding question, and actually it's so much more complicated, and it depends on the course, and it also depends on where you're from. So have a little look on Clearinghouse, and we'll make sure the description has the link in as well. If that's unclear, there is also the UK Council for International Student Affairs. Again, I will link it down below, and hopefully that will be helpful. Which NHS issues do you think are most important to consider for an interview? Okay, again, I would tailor this to yourself. What NHS issues have you experienced? Have you experienced some issues with funding, lack of training, lack of resources, staff cuts? What issues have you experienced in the NHS? Some examples might be privatisation or funding, COVID, staff wellbeing, adapting to remote therapy or psychological work, service demands and pressures, diversity and inclusion, parity of esteem, the idea that mental health and physical health should be viewed equally and valued in the same way. What do we think of the IAPT model? What's the NHS 5-year forward plan? What are the NICE guidelines? There are loads and loads of different things that you could think about, but I would encourage you to really think about what you've experienced, because I think you will speak from a more authentic place if you do that. And the last one on this page is tips for reflection. What books could prepare you? I've done a video on this. I've done the 5 best books for aspiring psychologists. What I'd encourage you to do is use reflective models. Again, we've done loads of videos, so have a look. What do you think about issues in psychology? And show your working. Really think about some of the things that you feel and have experienced. I've already kind of covered that anyway. Do they actually mind if you say, I don't know, but I would research it, to an answer? I think it depends on the course, but going back to the idea that courses want you to be authentic, then yeah, I don't think they will mind. That said, it is dependent, I think, on the question. If they ask you, tell me about CBT, and you go, I don't know, but I'd research it, that's a red flag, because CBT is it's an essential part of training. So having some knowledge of CBT is helpful. So I think it really depends. If they asked you about some obscure research stats test or something, and you went, I don't know, but I would research it, I'd find out, I'd talk to my supervisor, then I don't think that they would mind at all. Which theories should I prepare for discussion? Again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but any theories that you've worked with, I would say. If you haven't worked with any theories, then probably think about CBT, and maybe think about some critique points for that. That's probably the best one. How much lived experience is it okay to share, and how to go about sharing? Yeah, this is really personal to you. So I have some lived experience, and I have set boundaries in my head about what I'm happy to talk about and what I'm not. I think setting really clear boundaries before you go in is important, because when you're in that interview, you can kind of feel yourself getting pulled and thinking, oh, I should mention this because, and also this and this, and then suddenly you've told them everything, and maybe you didn't want to tell them everything. So really think about setting boundaries. I think it's okay to share whatever you're comfortable with. But that said, again, it really depends on the question. If they're asking you something that's completely unrelated, if they're asking you to design a research study and you go, well, I've got lived experience of this, it kind of doesn't, that's maybe not the most appropriate place to say it. But there will probably be some sort of question about why clinical psychology, and maybe that's a good place to put it if you feel comfortable. It's not a prerequisite, and it's definitely not something that absolutely have to do. So yeah, I think just think about some examples of where you might want to share it, and definitely set some boundaries. That's what I'd encourage you to do. And then this is my last page of Instagram questions, I think. Yes, it is. Are you allowed to take notes in? So online interviews, as I've said, you can have notes. When you're face to face, I think that's a little bit more orcs. I, in my experience, haven't taken notes in, because I think it almost becomes a bit of a barrier, and I might be trying to look at my notes to try and answer the question. Whereas when you're online, you can kind of just have a sly glance down to the side, or maybe think, and you might be looking away when you think, and you can look at your notes. Whereas when you're in face to face, I think it's more difficult. The courses, if you want to ask your particular course, I'd ask them and see what they say, because what's the worst thing that can happen? What kind of reasonable adjustments are available for disabled applicants? So, yeah, this will vary across the courses. Okay, so some courses are signed up to the Disability Confidence Scheme, the double tick scheme. And basically, the information that I found is that courses will respond as best they can to your individual needs. You go to them and say, look, I have this disability, I have this issue, I have this need. How can you respond to it? They will more than, I haven't heard of any courses that haven't met anyone's needs. But it really depends on the course. That's what I would have to say. Some of the reasonable adjustments might be extra time for the additional task. You know, if they're asking you to critique a journal article, they might give you 10 extra minutes or something like that. It really depends. They might give you written copies of the questions if that's something that you struggle with. Might give you some paper to take notes, or schedule the interview for a certain time of day, potentially. There are lots of different adjustments, but it depends. Generally, courses will try and meet your needs as best they can. And the last one for the Instagram questions is, what if I don't have much research experience? Is a service evaluation project enough? So they're not expecting us to have PhDs. Some people do, and that's fantastic. You've got loads of research experience, but they're not expecting us to be experts in research. We will get training, we'll get teaching when we're on training about research. And a service evaluation project is a fantastic bit of work. When you're on the course, most courses have different service evaluation projects as part of the assessment. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really good thing. And also it's research in a service setting, potentially NHS. It's a really useful bit of work. What I would say is reflect on the experience that you do have. You've all done an undergraduate or master's conversion dissertation, which is a research project. You've all done that. So, you know, you will have that experience. So just maybe reflect on that a bit. That's what I'd encourage you to do. So your questions. Thank you so much to everyone that's put a question in. I will start. Thank you so much. God, a while ago we had this question. Sorry. Did you feel your interviews went okay and struggled to understand why you didn't get on? With my Bath interview, no. I absolutely knew straight away. And everyone I spoke to was like, you never know. I'm like, no, I do. And it's not me being really self-deprecating. I just wasn't prepared. I didn't. You know, I wasn't working with clinical psychologists. I wasn't using reflective models. I didn't know what I know now. So yeah, I knew that one. There was no way I was going to get a place. For my one last year, it was definitely improvement, definitely. And to be honest, it really affected me. I hit rock bottom after I was rejected. Didn't even get a reserve place. On reflection, I realised that actually I wasn't quite I'm nowhere near where I am now, and I've developed a lot. But yeah, I was really gutted. I thought I'd done really well. I thought I'd done enough, and I didn't. And that was really hard, and so hard that I was thinking about completely changing what I was going to do with my life. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question a bit. Is it possible to have some question examples? As I said, we're asked not to share. That's the kind of difficult thing. Generally, there will be a question asking you to design some sort of research study. There will be probably, I mean, in my experience, there'll be something about why clinical psychology, but that's true of any interview. You know, why do you want to be an assistant psychologist? Why do you want to be a support worker? There's usually a question like that. They might have some scenario questions, and they probably will have some big issue questions. You know, what are the big issues in clinical psychology at the moment, or something like that. That's I hope that's something. I'm trying to be vague because, you know, it's difficult. How would you structure an answer to a research question? How to make sure you give enough detail of the research while still being reflective and not just stating what you did. Okay, so this is a question about when they ask you, tell us about some research that you've done. Yeah, I would probably use the what, so, what, now, what model. And I would say, this is the research that I did. It was this design. This was the hypothesis. This was how I did the study. This was the outcome. And then I'd go on to so what. So the reason that that's important, you know, what jumped out for me, what I learned during doing that research, and what I would do differently. And that takes you on to the now what. So what would you continue to do, or what would you do differently? That's one way you can do it. Again, you can do the STAR model as well if that's helpful. But I think if they're asking you to reflect on some research that you've done, they are looking for that reflection at that point. So yeah, I think using what, so, what, now, what, the so what bit is your reflection. So you can really think about what went well, what went badly, what emotions did it elicit, how did you develop? I hope that helps. Do you know if you should be integrating theory into every question, if it can have it in? Oh, that's tricky. Again, I think it depends on the course. Different courses like different things. I suppose it depends on the question. In my experience, when they want you to talk about theory, they're quite often very verbal about it. They might ask you what model you might use in a certain situation. But if they don't, if it's a scenario, yeah, I'd try and integrate some theory. Try and think about that. If it's even if you're trying to reflect on a clinical case that you had, you could use a theory to explain why you felt that way. One of my favorites is compassion focused therapy, and I try and incorporate that into my answers. So yeah, it's difficult. I think when you can, yeah, try and make that a point, but I wouldn't worry too much if you forget, as long as you have a discussion about theory at some point, because that is an important part of it. They do want to know that you have that knowledge and that you're able to articulate that, I think. What prep should be done around policy? How much do they expect you to know? Good question. I think it depends on the policy. My answer for everything is it depends, because it does. I think they won't need you to know about, you know, if you're interviewing at Bath, and they won't necessarily want you to know what the risk assessment policy is at Bath. You know, that it won't be that detailed, because to be honest, most risk assessment policies are the same. So whatever experience you have of following a certain policy or procedure is probably the policy and procedure that you'll be following on training. In terms of policy, I think the only time policy will come up is probably something around what would you do in this situation? And then you can mention policy there. You can say, you know, I'd follow all of the risk assessment or safeguarding policies of the service and the university that I'm working in, that sort of thing. I don't think they expect you to know a lot, but all of us will have worked with policies in various different organisations, and they're virtually the same. So I wouldn't get too caught up on policy stuff. I wouldn't worry too much about it. It depends if you mean policy or evidence-based guidelines. If it's guideline stuff, having some knowledge of NICE guidelines, the fact that they exist and that we should adhere to them and that they're evidence-based, is important. I think they want to understand your awareness of the evidence base and the fact that they are going to be training us to contribute to the evidence base. So there's that as well. I hope that helps. Do some courses ask very specific research methods or stats questions? For example, what stat analysis would you use for X? Yeah, some do, I think. From what I've heard from other people, I've never been asked that, but yeah, some do. But if you don't know, you don't know. You can find that out in a textbook. So I think if they're asking you that, they probably care more about how you respond to that rather than whether you actually know it, because anybody can find it in a textbook. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I'm a bit confused about the notes thing. I know last year some courses asked applicants to show around their room or desk to show they didn't have notes. Well, that's brand new information to me. Yeah, wow. Maybe they did. It depends on the course, I guess. I mean, that's why I would probably ask the course what they would advise, and whether they will be checking, because that's something that will throw you off. If you have notes and they say, I want to check if you've got any notes, that will absolutely throw you off. So I would wing them a quick email and say, is it all right to have a couple of like little notes to help me, or would you advise that I don't? What is the worst that can happen? What's the worst? Because they can't judge you on that email. They can only judge you on what's on the interview. So don't worry. You can always just do that. That's what I would encourage you to do if you're worried about that, which I now am. What is the difference between psychological theory and psychological approach / model? What are the theories that you would mention? Yeah, I think the psychological theory, approach, model, I think it's all the same, really. That's kind of the stuff that they're looking for, is what theory or model. It's all the same. You can have CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, as a model, as an approach, as a therapy. As a theory, sorry. The ones that I would mention are ones that you've worked with yourself, ones that you actually have experience in, or that you've spent a lot of time researching or employing into practice is probably the best thing. All of the courses, every single one, will teach CBT. So, but most places you work nowadays will have CBT. So, yeah, I'd learn a little bit about CBT, maybe think a little bit about what a CBT formulation might look like. And maybe spend some time thinking about what you think about CBT and critiquing it your way. In terms of any other theories, if there's any others that you've come across that you like, I really like CFT, compassion focused therapy. So I'm going to bring that up if I can, because I think it's a great model. And again, that's being really true to myself and authentic. Roughly how much? Yeah, as I say, some courses are quite formal and they say, you'll have 5 minutes to answer the question and we will cut you off at 5 minutes. Some don't give you that cut off, so it's really difficult to say. I would say anywhere between sort of 3 and 5 minutes, I suppose. You won't really want to go much longer than that, because if you are going much longer than that, you're probably not being succinct enough with your answer and concise enough. So when you're practicing yourself, yeah, try and make sure that it doesn't go over 5 minutes. That's what I would suggest. I've been told my interview is only 15 to 20 minutes based on clinical skills. Last year was a vignette and 2 questions. How on earth do I stand out with only 2 questions? That sounds tricky. And there was no academic interview or anything. That's a surprise. I think what you'd need to do, I mean, if it is a vignette and 2 questions, bear in mind that everybody is only going to have 2 questions. It's not like everyone's going to have 10 and you're going to have 2. So don't worry, you're not at a disadvantage. They do that deliberately to make it difficult. So think about the vignette, and if there's 2 questions, okay, so what they're trying to do in those 2 questions is cover all the clinical skills stuff that they're interested in. Think about the course ethos. What are they interested in as a course? Some courses are really interested in neuropsychology. Some are really interested in clinical health. So maybe try and think about some of those sorts of approaches that you can look at. I would definitely, if it's the clinical interview and they're talking about a vignette, I'd be very surprised if you didn't have to talk about some sort of theory and maybe critique it. And I'd be surprised if there wasn't something on risk or safeguarding or how you would manage or supervision. I think it's really difficult. And I think how you stand out is by reflecting on the experience that you've got and trying to apply that to this vignette in any way that you can. You'll have loads of transferable skills. So just try to do that. I hope that helps. I think that is tricky. That sounds like it's really hard. And I don't have all the answers, unfortunately. I wish I did. Basically, do the best that you can. Terrible advice, I know. But all you can do is the best that you can do. And remember that everyone else is in the same position as you. So try not to worry too much that you're at a disadvantage or anything, because you're not. Everyone is trying to stand out with those 2 questions as well. So the last question that I've had in, please do add any more if you've got any. what are some good resources for revising research methods and stats? Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a book hoarder, so I've still got my research methods books from undergrad. I've bought a research methods and psychology stats for dummies book, which is really helpful. There's actually the BPS and a couple of other places on YouTube do some quick research methods videos that can help. Try not to get too hung up on it unless the course is very big on research methods and stats. You can always say that you'll consult a statistician or have a look in a textbook or talk to your supervisor. So try not to worry too much about any of that. But yeah, those sorts of resources, it depends on what you like learning. I do really well from reading. Some people like to watch videos. So have a little look around. There are plenty. And the Andy Field textbook, I think, is another one that everyone always talks about. That is worth it. And if you look at loads of university secondhand pages, I got one for a tenner a couple of months ago. So have a look on there. How many questions would you expect in a 45-minute interview? Well, 45 minutes at maybe 5 minutes each, maybe 8 or 9, maybe something like that, I would expect. But it might well be that they have 4 main questions and each main question has something like that. Yeah. So it's difficult to say, and I think it depends on the course. Some courses might have a role play built into that interview that you will know about beforehand usually. Some courses might have a clinical vignette built into the interview, so that, takes more time. So it's difficult to say, really. Any tips on critiquing CBT? Don't want to completely rip into their main model. Yeah, I think, that's definitely something that I felt when I was doing my previous interviews, because I think CBT can be helpful for a lot of people, but in my personal experience of using CBT, there's something that's been quite sticky and it's not been useful to me. So again, I think relating it to your own experience might be helpful. Think about why you don't like the CBT model and try and relate that to the wider population, maybe. I mean, yeah, it is evidence-based, but the way you can critique that is, CBT was funded much more heavily than any other model. So that's why it's the most evidence-based. You can think of it that way. And actually, you are going to stand out if you are critiquing that model, because that is what they want you to do. The courses are they don't necessarily choose CBT. And I don't know if all the courses would choose CBT as their main model. It's more about the way that they're funded and what sorts of psychologists the NHS want and need. So you can think of it that way. I have done a video on CBT, on the introduction to cognitive behavioural therapy, and that also has a bit of a critique in there as well, and some helpful resources for you. Hope that helps. I really do. I think you can only critique a model based on what you think. Yeah, absolutely, I can tell you what I think about it, but really you need to decide on what you think about it and think about why, and also think about doing that, critiquing it in a tactful way. Because that's also another thing that they're testing in an interview is how you relate to other people and how you speak, because you're going to be speaking to their clients. Of course, it's different for everyone, but how much time do you feel you'll be giving yourself to prepare for your next interview based on learning from previous experiences? Yes. So for my interview 2 years ago, my first one, I had like 2 months to prepare, and that was just too long, to be honest. I just was obsessed with finding out all the information possible about psychology. What I'm doing at the moment is being really boundaried. I'm allowing myself to have time off on the weekends, on the evenings. I'm trying not to do too much. I'm being really boundaried with that. It depends on when your interview is as well. I think it's difficult. Yeah. I think what I've done, though, I'm not really worried about how much time it's going to take. I've done a to-do list of things that I'd like to do beforehand. And my plan is to get all of that done before my mock interview. And then I can sort of just focus on getting myself into the best possible place. If I don't know it by the night before, I'm not going to know it. I'm going to relax. I'm going to enjoy myself. In my case, I'm going to watch the Grand Prix. But essentially, write a focused to-do list of things that you want to do. And try and be really boundaried with your time. Don't just spend loads of time on it, because you also need to look after yourself as a human being. because that's how you'll get the best out of yourself, I think, on the interview. Any advice on where to get course ethos information from? Is it just on their website? It's hard to find on the course that I'm applying to. If it's through Clearinghouse, if they're one of the courses that's on Clearinghouse, it will all be on there. If not, then yeah, it will be on the uni website. What you could do is send them an email and ask them, have you got any handbooks or any trainees I can speak to? Or, can you give me a brief idea of what your ethos is? You could do that. What I'd encourage you to do, though, is, and this goes for anybody, is to think about the course ethos when you're applying, because then if you get an interview, then you already know that the course ethos fits with your values and you already know what it is. I get it that some people might be restricted by location, as I am to an extent, so I do get that. What do you think they're looking for in a research critique? Any advice is helpful. I think they're looking for some confidence in yourself, and that you've got a voice and that you're not afraid to use that, to be critical and also to be able to weigh up the positives and the negatives. They're looking for that critical eye. They're looking for you to be able to be balanced, I think, and to be able to summarize what you're thinking. And to do it on the spot is difficult. But as part of being a clinical psychologist is holding a lot of things in mind while you're talking about stuff. So I think that's kind of what they're trying to get you to model while you're in the interview. In a research critique, yeah, maybe they're looking for a bit of reflection. It depends on the situation. If it's research about, for example, if I were reading a research paper and it was about white women who are in their 20s who live in the south of England / in Wales, then I would be able to bring in some stuff about me and say, well, actually, I'm representative of that sample, and this, I feel this, and this brings up this, and blah, 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 blah. You can do it that way. Yeah, I mean, what you could do is have a look at some research papers and maybe some critiques of those papers, or have a look about how to critique journal articles. I am going to do a video on that in the next couple of months anyway. Although that'll probably be too late for the interviews. Do you think they mind if you refer to service users as patients? I work on an inpatient ward, so I'm used to saying patients. So this is something I actually feel quite strongly about, but I was conflicted about up until maybe a few months ago. In my service, I'm in a primary care service, and the majority of our staff are nurses, and they're very used to using the term patients. Again, in hospitals, that's what they will be called. So that's slightly different. I personally use the word clients, and because I think service users has a connotation as well. It's a whole thing. I think you can use that. I just think you can name that and say, there is something for me about feeling uncomfortable about calling them patients because I don't agree with the dominance of the biomedical model, for example. Naming that and having that discussion when you've said it as part of your answer could be helpful. I think everyone has their own different opinions, and I think that goes for interviewers. I don't think any one person has an opinion. Any one panel is going to have the same opinion as another panel. So I think just it's important to maybe have that conversation if it feels important for you, which it does because you're asking the question. So if it's important for you that you're not quite sure which term to use and you're not quite sure which you feel comfortable with, but you do use patients because that's where your service is, then name it, talk about it. I think that's completely fine if it's relevant, of course. How much of your political views is appropriate to bring up? So this is something that what I would think about. Yes, it's important to be authentic and honest, but think about if you were going to an assistant interview or a support worker interview, or any sort of interview really, and because they're never going to ask you about your political views. There's never going to be a direct question ever, and I would probably encourage you not to talk about your politics. What you can talk about, I suppose, this is just my preference, but you do whatever is authentic for you, because you might have a different relationship to politics than I do, and you might feel more comfortable to talk about it. I personally don't, so I personally wouldn't talk about my politics. What you can do is talk about clinical psychology's involvement in politics. and how important it is for social justice issues that clinical psychology gets involved. You could maybe talk about that sort of thing, and how us as clinical psychologists are really well placed to support people that don't have voices. You know, we're going to be doctors. You know, we're going to be consultants one day. We have a lot more power than the average person that might be accessing a service. And the idea of that power balance in terms of politics is important. So what I would do is spend some time thinking about what your views are, how much you're comfortable to share, whether it's relevant to share. But the only way I think it's probably relevant is if they ask about why clinical psychology for you. And if that reason is partly political, then absolutely say that, whatever's authentic. I think one of the biggest things out of this that I've learned putting this webinar together is do whatever is authentic for you and what feels right for you, because that's the most important thing. That is absolutely the most important thing. I'm glad it's helpful. I'm really glad it's helpful. Because sometimes I feel like I'm rambling a bit. I'm pleased it's helpful. And that's just my opinion on stuff. Like, absolutely, you have your own opinions and do whatever you want. This is not a hard and fast way of doing things. Now, I haven't had any more questions in. But absolutely, if you think of any more, pop them in the chat while I go through. I have got some helpful resources for you. So Clearinghouse and course websites. It has information around all the courses. That's standard. We all know this, but have a little look if you can. Some courses might have handbooks that are available to download from previous years. That might help in some way. But I mean, they might ask you what about our course particularly interests you. So having a few ideas of why that course is helpful. YouTube is a massive resource for me. Obviously, I'm going to promote my own stuff, obviously. I've got loads of stuff about reflective models, reflective practice and social graces, loads of stuff on there. CBT, compassion focused therapy, have a look. There'll be something there for you. And a YouTube video is much, much nicer to watch, hopefully, than sitting down and just staring at some paper, hopefully. The Worry People, fantastic channel. She's a trainee, second year trainee, and she does some really brilliant videos to help aspiring psychologists, so check her out. She's brilliant. I will link her below. Same with the Oxford Psych. She's done a DClinPsy applicants and interviews FAQs. She is a first year trainee at Oxford. She is fab. Ika, her name is. And then we've got David Murphy as well. He's done a couple of different, 3 different videos. He's done tips for online doctorate interviews and success in clinical psychology interviews, parts 1 and 2. So have a little look at those. And the other ones, you can have a look at the BPS and the ACP. They will have the Psychologist magazine that will have sort of research digest. It will have opinion pieces that you might be able to talk about if you're interested. The Division of Clinical Psychology has a pre-qualified group with so many resources, some of them written by me, which is super hilarious, but definitely go and have a look. Clinical Psychology Forum as well, and events both for the BPS and the ACP UK. Hopefully those resources are a bit helpful. Is it okay to DM you to ask you further questions about clinical formulation? You can, absolutely. I have also done a video on formulation, but yeah, definitely. If you leave me a comment or find me on Instagram or Facebook, absolutely send me a message. That's great. So just to summarize then, well done for getting an interview. It's a huge achievement. Do not disregard that. It's really important. Well done. Be focused with your preparation. Think about what you feel your gaps are, what you think might benefit you from an interview. Don't over prepare. Definitely. Breathe and use anxiety management techniques and reward yourself afterwards regardless of outcome. Do something you enjoy. That's the most important thing. I sincerely hope that this has been useful for some of you or for all of you. I appreciate it's a bit more generic maybe than some of you wanted. I know I'm not able to share previous questions and things, but I've given a couple of hints. Thank you so much for the comments. That's really, really lovely. And thank you so much for joining me. Keep an eye on Instagram and Facebook for the next webinars and the next videos. And let me know in the comments if there's anything that you want to see. Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you next time. Good luck with all of your interviews. Fingers crossed for everybody, unless you're interviewing at my course, and I'm joking. Fingers crossed.